This video is about Preserve Fort Collins and their disinformation campaign used to repeal the Land Development Code. My name is Holly Terry. I'm a resident in Fort Collins District 1. In this video, I'll show with evidence why I believe Preserve Fort Collins should not receive 1 minute of additional airtime beyond what is legally required, because it is an escalating, dangerous disinformation campaign against real people. I'll define what I mean by escalating, what I mean by disinformation campaign, and why I believe it has real impacts to real people's real lives. There are 3 escalating categories of disinformation: lies about what the code says, the narrative that the code was passed secretly in a rush, and the dangerous spin that the city players are designing policy for personal gain, that they're corrupt. Here's what I mean by disinformation. It's deliberate. That's how it's different than misinformation. I don't mean to suggest everyone who supports Preserve Fort Collins knows they are lying, but 2 of the power holders involved in opposing the code do know that they are lying. We'll start with lies about the code, and we'll start with Cunniff, the leader of Preserve Fort Collins and former city council member, who said early in the repeal process on Reddit that his biggest concern is with the elimination of neighborhood notices. But that's not honest. There have been no changes to the public notification process. From the beginning, at the initial Preserve Fort Collins community meeting, the narrative has been that you will not be notified of development projects near your home until you see the bulldozer. Cunniff did not bring 1 sheet of actual information about the code to this meeting. He admitted in the Coloradoan that the campaign had already disseminated misstatements. He said it was an accident, but he didn't stop. Even now on the website, he's still got the bulldozer quote. The first time you would find out about it might be when the bulldozer shows up next door, even though you are actually exactly as likely to be notified as you ever have been. Since his biggest concern isn't true, let's look at his second biggest concern, that only 20 years of affordability is required. This one is the opposite of true. The old code is 20 years. The staff recommended extending it to 50, and the council instructed them to extend it to 99, which is the longest allowed by law. The increase from 50 to 99 is one of the 19 changes between first and second reading that Cunniff claims to be upset about, even though he admittedly doesn't know what they are. Did you know that the new code allows, at the very least, duplexes and triplexes in all residential districts? If you didn't, that's because it's not true. There are several zones where duplexes and triplexes were not added to what's allowed. The escalated, more concerning type of disinformation centers around a narrative that the code was passed secretly in a rush. The Preserve Fort Collins website is full of this kind of rhetoric. Shamefully, the city council did this as secretly as possible, blindsiding residents. Our city council voted quietly and quickly to turn most of Fort Collins into a free-for-all. We're doing the public outreach that the city council won't. But nothing about these changes was a secret. They were specifically and explicitly discussed for years. The city plan was passed in April 2019. It mentions density 71 times. It explicitly talks about increased density along transit corridors. It explicitly talks about using density requirements to maximize the use of land for development to increase housing supply. It envisions future place types and defines all the residential areas of the city into 3 categories of place types, and all of them include ADUs. What Preserve Fort Collins calls the end of single-family zoning is actually the end of exclusionary zoning, where only single-family houses can be built, because ADUs are allowed now in every zone. Whether you like this or hate it, it's certainly not a secret or a rush. It was explicitly envisioned in a huge public process in 2019. Cunniff knows what's in the city plan because he voted for it. That's why it's disinformation. A leader could certainly support something in theory and oppose the execution for honest reasons, but that's not what happened here. He knows the city plan envisioned ending exclusionary zoning in 2019 and is telling you today that the change was a secret rush. The housing strategic plan was informed by the city plan and passed in March of 2021. It is even more specific. And Cunniff voted to pass it. He knows what's in it. So what's in it? In the executive summary, right at the beginning, the plan talks about ADUs, directs an update to the land use code, talks explicitly about removing barriers to density. It explicitly recommends allowing ADUs in all residential zone districts. It talks explicitly about updating the code and about affordability incentives. It literally talks about collaborating with developers to understand barriers to developing the types of housing we need, so we can remove those barriers so developers are more likely to take on projects. It uses development as a tool to solve problems. Now, if you hate development under all circumstances, that's one thing, but it's a lie to say anything was done without full transparency. And remember, Cunniff voted for it and says here on Reddit that the housing strategic plan had a lot of outreach. He supports it. The city did 7 formal public sessions for regular old citizens just about the code. That's not counting all they did for the city plan or housing strategic plan. The info sessions explicitly discussed ADUs. It specifically discussed working with developers to understand how to get more homes built. And it names them, which is the opposite of being secretive. In every presentation, there's a timeline. As you can see, the code was passed 6 full months after it was scheduled to pass. It was delayed over and over for more conversation. One of the many documents used to inform the land use code is a diagnostic report, and it explicitly recommends changing the name of the code from land use code to land development code. Nothing about this passage was a surprise. In this next level of escalation, the disinformation gets worse and scarier. As most of us experience, Preserve Fort Collins has a ruthless text spamming habit. Their language has consistently insinuated corruption. Here's a text: our city government asked developers and other insiders what they wanted in the new code, but they did not ask you or your neighbors. And another: city government and its powerful allies are trying to silence your voice and obstruct your constitutional rights. In this level of the escalation, the rhetoric starts to speak to dishonest motives. Someone's out to get you. At that first community meeting, a man ranted from the back of the room, "The government is corrupt." He said it more than once. The Preserve Fort Collins website accuses the pro-code council members of old-fashioned cronyism, says they are choosing profits over people and enriching developers. And it works. Here's a signature collector who has been a victim of this disinformation telling a would-be signer that developers can take your property, tear down whatever they want, and build whatever they want.
They are now giving carte blanche to developers to come in anywhere, tear down whatever they want, and build multi-level buildings. Establish single-family neighborhoods have no vacant land. That means if you have a property they can say, "Oh, there's enough room to build an apartment building back there."
They can't just take property.
That's what this says. Establish single-family neighborhoods have no vacant lot. This means that existing houses can be demolished and replaced by multi-family housing next door to you, just to increase their density goal. And why would they do that? It's not.
You said they don't have anything about affordability.
No. It gives the developers profit versus the citizen.
We'll never know how many signatures they would have collected if they had told the truth. And I just want to put all of this in context. These people are accusing these people of old-fashioned cronyism. But there's another player. I believe Kelly Ohlson, this additional player, has been the most explicit about the most dangerous unfounded accusations. Here he is directly calling the city staff corrupt.
The city simply must move away from this definition of stakeholder that's corrupt. But to have them dominate the process is corrupt. And I'm intentionally using that word.
Again, this happened in November of 2021, a year before the code was passed. The opposition to the code was vicious even then, but we're supposed to believe it was rushed through and kept secret. I commented publicly last February at council that it was unacceptable for him to make these accusations about an important word without any evidence. According to a recent open records request, he nor Cunniff have ever submitted evidence of corruption, and they have never requested investigation. The escalation also involves narrowing in on two specific people and ramping up the lies about them. In a recent public statement, Preserve Fort Collins says Emily Francis and Julie Pignataro have lost the confidence of voters, engaged in improper and unprofessional conduct, and must recuse themselves from the issue. They say Francis and Pignataro secretly formed FOCO Forward, which, by the way, is the most enormous community coalition I've ever seen. It does not seem like Francis and Pignataro have lost the confidence of voters. Francis and Pignataro were at that first community meeting where Cunniff insinuated they were corrupt, and he wouldn't let them speak and defend themselves. They spoke to the paper, identified themselves as founders of FOCO Forward, and explained they were working with the city attorney to be sure they didn't break any rules. When I was asked about it on Facebook, I answered honestly, quickly, and directly. And this was before Preserve Fort Collins published their statement saying that Francis and Pignataro were secretly involved. Councilmember Pignataro stood on a stage with other FOCO Forward leaders at an event to support the code. Once again, there is no secret going on here. It's ludicrous to think these people have personal profit motives. They aren't a secret. You can find them on LinkedIn and see what they've done and how they engage with the community. They have no way of profiting from the land development code, and it's dangerous disinformation to promote a narrative that they do. So what is the motive? Equity. That's the motive. Just after the title page, just 4 sentences into the housing strategic plan, it says, our BIPOC and low-income households are disproportionately impacted. These community members are experiencing lower homeownership rates, lower income levels, and higher rates of poverty. Equity isn't a strategy of the plan. It's the lens for the whole thing. It's the entire point. The city followed the evidence and experts to develop the land development code for the purpose of creating equity. Now, someone may think they know better than the evidence and the experts how to do that. But to paint the picture of Francis and Pignataro as corrupt and self-serving is a dangerous lie, and it has consequences. It starts the disinformation machine online. Here's someone talking about a leftist takeover in Fort Collins. It calls the council fascist. Another person says the plan is being pushed on citizens so they can silence us. A commenter at a council meeting called for the pro-code council members to resign and move out of town. Someone else dropped some accusations of New World Order conspiracy theory, which is a recycled, very scary anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that has resulted in real-life violence. 2 council members have told me they feel less safe from Preserve Fort Collins' targeting campaign, and another confirmed people have yelled outside her home. It's dangerous. As a community, we need to be disciplined about not giving this kind of rhetoric a platform. It's dangerous because it's escalating and that middle tier is large. I think we all know someone by now who is smart and good and says, well, I didn't know about the code. But that middle tier is meant for the masses. It's meant to inject just enough doubt that the city is honest, and it works. It is disinformation because the power holders who know they are lying are fanning the flames, and real live people pay the price. Please do not accommodate Preserve Fort Collins obstruction any more than legally necessary. Thank you.